About half of all the world's leaders attended the coronation of King Charles III. 90 heads of state attended the event, as well as 14 prime ministers from countries where their king is still their monarch. Servicemen and women from 33 Commonwealth countries took part in the procession. Kings and queens from Europe and beyond were in the congregation. With the king's accession, the Commonwealth enters a new and uncertain era. King Charles III has already made clear that he will respect the view of any of the realms that wish to cease their association with the monarchy. Joining us now to discuss the continuing relevance of royal diplomacy with King Charles III's accession and the crisis in Sudan and its implications across the African continent is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Good morning, sir, and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning, Ayo. Thank you for inviting me to your show again.
Well, Prof, thank you for joining us. Well, very quickly, I would like your assessment of how the evacuation of stranded Nigerians in Sudan has been handled so far, particularly with regard to the diplomatic side of it. Nigeria reporting that Egypt initially did not want to give access to Nigerians to be airlifted out of Egypt until President Buhari intervened. And all of this was after 12 other countries had evacuated their persons and the crisis had entered the third week. Egypt and Nigeria are both members of the African Union. The same Egypt did not give the same stringent conditions to other countries. Why did we find ourselves in that kind of situation? Is it that we don't have good relations with Egypt?
Well, good morning, Dr. Abati, and good morning, Rufai. I suppose I'm to answer Ayo's question on the coronation first, before this Sudanese issue you've raised. Am I right? Or is that the other way around?
You can start from whichever way you like.
Okay, thank you. Look, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade. And I don't, you will excuse that pun, since it did rain on the parade. So I will start with my positive comments. But let me also put forward, in front on the table, the fact that I'm a freak when it comes to military parade. I love military parades. And there's no country that puts up a show like the British did. It was a spectacular performance. Had me glued to my seat all throughout the event. Number two, the cultural appearance of the Commonwealth. That's the way I will put it. Not even Britain as a cultural mix. The United States probably is the most mixed country in the world when it comes to color. But even the United States could not have put on that kind of thing that was put on at the Abbey. And its impact on the rest of the world. I think if you have a barometer to measure pro-British sentiment in the world yesterday and today, that coronation would have scored King Charles probably 95%. And I hope that is an indication of what he would like to see. Because we shouldn't deceive ourselves. He will have very little influence on policy. That is determined at number 10 by the Prime Minister. But nevertheless, he has sent a signal to the rest of the world, because that was his show, that he has respect for all cultures and all races and all religion. Whether that will now translate into the key issues that will determine British relationship with the rest of the world or with the Commonwealth is another thing entirely. When Queen Elizabeth II died, Amon Paul made a comment, and I think that comment should be put clearly on the table. She said, I hope Charles III will not adopt the policy of his mother in terms of returning the loot which the British took away from the colonies, in terms of dealing with the British historical links with slavery, and in terms of reparations. These really are the three issues. By next week, we will have forgotten about the coronation. But these three issues will now be staring us in the face. Reparations, especially since the Germans have started it. They should even start with an apology straight on the table by the British, an apology for what happened during the slavery times and during colonial times. Then we should talk about the issue of reparation. That's a very big topic, because to whom should the reparations be paid? To us in Africa or to the Africans in the diaspora? My own suggestion would be to the Africans in the diaspora. We suffered, they suffered as well, but we were complicit in that slave trade. And if our own punishment is going to be that we don't get reparations, but that the whole of the reparations go to the Africans in the diaspora, I'm perfectly happy to be engaged in a conversation on that. Now, I've done my bit in terms of my positive comments. My two negative comments, however, are there. I don't like the way they treated Harry. He was humiliated. A song and dance was made about whether he should be invited or not, and whether if he was invited, he will come, and where will he sit. Now, you invited the chap. He accepted, only for you to, for the palace, I won't say the king, for the palace, under the influence of William, to subject him to that disgraceful sitting arrangement in the abbey. Number one, he is a war veteran. He didn't earn his medals or his robes by just being born prince. He served twice in Afghanistan, and he was an accomplished pilot from what we've read about it. So he was entitled to all the medals that he had got. Number two, he was a knight commander of the Victorian Order, which is one of the highest orders in Britain. And so he was entitled to wear the purple robes of that order. The palace told him, don't wear your robes. And yet we saw members of the royal family who did nothing positive in their lives being allowed to wear their robes. And then you had a choice. You could seat people by the order of ascension, possibility of ascension to the throne, which then meant that it would be William and his family. And Harry is still in the line of succession. Instead, you decided to do it to sitting by non-performing royals. and you put him in the third row. I think that's despicable performance by the palace. And this was the kind of thing that drove them into exile. There were people in that palace who were anti-Harry and prepared to show it at any time that they have an opportunity. So I didn't like that. Finally, I'm a bit wary about the way the police dealt with the demonstrators. Freedom is the right to demonstrate in favor or to demonstrate against. I can understand, for security reasons, why the police will be edgy. But to rush through legislation, empowering the police on the basis of suspicion to stop people from demonstrating against the monarchy, even though all they were doing was carrying placards around Trafalgar Square, that sends a wrong signal to the rest of the world about what they also can do to their own freedom demonstrators. If there's any policy people want to demonstrate against, and the government of the day is not in favor, you can then empower the police to do whatever it is you want to do with them. Amnesty has criticized it. Human Rights Watch has criticized it. And I think that, we should be wary of that kind of British contribution towards a negation of freedom. So, I hope I've satisfied you.
Yes, thank you very much.
As regards, thank you. As regards Dr. Abati's question on the Sudan, which we've talked about several times. Yesterday, I was listening to Abike Dabiri appealing to Nigerians, please obey the law. Simply because 2 people disappeared from the tarmac, and the Egyptians said unless they find those 2 people, no plane was going to take off for Nigeria. I don't know whether they found those 2 people eventually or what happened. And I recall saying, I'm not sure whether it's on your platform or somewhere else, that my problem with Nigerians is always this cutting corners, disobeying the law. You lay down perfect arrangements, and you are bound to find one Nigerian. I mean, we just saw what happened at the coronation in Britain. Apart from the horse, who decided to protest by turning around and was quickly brought back under control. Everybody knew where he was supposed to be. Everybody knew what he was supposed to do. There was no step out of line. 2 Nigerians disappeared from the tarmac. And, Egypt has the same problem that we have with Boko Haram, ISIS, Muslim Brotherhood, and so on. So they said, let us drive away the fox before we start to blame ourselves. Egypt has security problems. And I'm sure would like to be able to monitor who comes out of Egypt and who goes out of Egypt. Again, we showed our true colors. Yes, I'm not happy at the dysfunctionality of the arrangements in Nigeria. Egypt knows only one institution of diplomacy that it deals with when dealing with Nigeria, and that's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That is why we opened an embassy there, so that those that we entrust with those functions will also know the rules on the ground, whose telephone number they should have, whom they can call at midnight, whom they should cultivate and everything. Then we bring in the Diaspora Commission, we bring in Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs that probably Egypt has never heard about, and they now start to influence what will be happening in Egypt. That doesn't make any sense. So don't let us blame Egypt for our own dysfunctionality. Empower the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to do its job. And then we can complain if they are derelict in doing that job or they are not doing it effectively. But interposing the Diaspora Commission in the foreign field is only going to lead to the kind of problem that we saw. Number two, I listened once to your show when Rufai said, oh, what I was looking, what would make me proud as a citizen of the giant of Africa would have been for our Air Force, go in there, the paratroopers, pick up our people, put them on that ship, and send them back home. And then I will give all of them thumbs up. Fine. But do you want to clap with one empty hand? Have you empowered the military to do this? Dr. Abati and Rufai were probably students in the university when I was a minister. Ayo was not born at that time, so I won't put it. I won't bring her into this conversation. Students in the university, and I'm sure Dr. Abati was probably one of them, were demonstrating against me. So I was the only minister, or IBB's minister, that they demonstrated against because of the activist foreign policy that I was proposing when I was in office. I asked for the setting up of Interventionist brigade that will be a paratroop brigade that can go in and do this kind of job. They will be trained. They said I was mad, spend, money we should be spending in creating more states and importing more champagne, spend it on creating an interventionist force. Where will Nigeria go anyway, and where will we be intervening? We, of course, ended up intervening in Ecomog, in Sierra Leone and Liberia, and we ended up, a restoration of democracy to those two countries, but at a higher cost than if we have had this kind of instrumentalities. I made a proposition for the Navy to have 2 frigates, one based in the Atlantic Ocean, the other one based in the Indian Ocean. Probably we'll have to sign an agreement with Mayotte or Mauritius and what have you. And that these ships will be available to show our flag, to show that, we say we are the giant of Africa that we say we are, and that we need to intervene. Because I must make a confession. I never thought that, we will have to be evacuating our citizens. When the 80s was not a period of evacuation. But again, I was told we wanted to waste money. We should just have all these coastal ships that will be flying flags and so on. And now that the time has come, we now find ourselves empty-handed. We found India outplaying us on the African continent. All the Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Republic, they are the major players in the Sudan. We are not. Why? Because we have neglected our own armed forces. And it's rather ironic that we've had military leaders as head of states, but their own internal fighting, the cleavage within the armed forces, had prevented them from building up the kind of security apparatus that will be an adjunct to our foreign policy. Because it is the foreign policy objectives that you set first, and then you work backwards for the instrumentalities that will help you achieve the objectives. Have we learned a lesson from this? Let me quote Rufai's famous phrase: this will happen again because we don't learn our lessons. Okay. This has happened. We will close the chapter and we will move on to doing the kind of things that, that we do.
Okay, sir.
Final, sorry, can I just make one more comment?
Yes.
Can we afford an activist foreign policy? The answer is yes, we can afford it. If we steal less money and make proper application of resources to where they should go.
Okay, sir. So, sir, I mean, concerning your African bomb, push then, and all those that mocked you, especially famous cartoonist Josie Ajiboye, that famously did a cartoon and said you were clamoring for a bomb when we don't have electricity then. I think you've been vindicated, with what happened, in Sudan, because that cartoon was way back then and we got to read all of that history. But I'd like to ask you two specific questions. When you look back, sir, what do you feel about this, can I use the word madaru, that has gone on in the ministry you once served? Because as of today, we don't even know who is speaking. Is it NIDCOM? Is it NEMA? Is it the Foreign Affairs Ministry? Who is even conducting the evacuation? There's just a lot of what I would say in Yoruba parlance, carry-meism. Everybody wants to be seen doing something. And you wonder who is supposed to be speaking and who is supposed to own this. This multiplication of duty as we see. That's number one. Number two will be about what is happening even in Sudan itself. Because the violence has now taken an ethnic dimension. Other parts of Sudan, it is an ethnic fight. Saudi Arabia has called them in today for a ceasefire, but we don't know how that's going to pan out. Also, that is also snowballing into blocking food aid into South Sudan. South Sudan tried to mediate the first ceasefire, but the sea is going overboard. Are we, going full throttle on our way to a full ethnic crisis now in Sudan? Because the fight is no longer about Hameti and Al-Burnan any longer. It has now taken an ethnic dimension.
Well, thank you for those two questions. If a foreign minister is just as good as his president wants him to be, if the president wants other institutions to interfere, I will put it that way, in the areas of constitutional responsibility of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he will do so. He will set up these institutions and he will now assign responsibilities to them without even laying a platform for consultation. I don't blame the people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If your president either does not speak and he doesn't want you to speak, then you are quiet. If you are not quiet, you lose the job. And maybe, if you have honor to protect, you walk away from the job, you turn in your letter of resignation. Let me say this today, publicly. People don't really know that I was not the only foreign minister when I was the foreign minister. Yes, there were no ministers of state appointed for the ministry. But I don't want to mention their names. There were people in the military who were also advising IBB on foreign policy issues. There were people who were being given responsibilities that properly belong to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And what I simply did was to play around them. If those issues are not really terribly important to me, I just let them carry on. We have people visiting, foreigners visiting, that I was brought in at the last minute. They didn't ask us to prepare a paper for them as to why we should receive them. That had been settled within military circles. Let me give you one example. The Minister of Foreign Affairs in Egypt wanted to visit Nigeria as part of his tour around West Africa, which was fine. By the time we now got to know in the ministry, I said we cannot accommodate this because we already had a laid-down program. The military attaché, our Nigerian military attaché in Cairo, called IBB to complain that I was being hostile to the Minister of Egypt, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, that I was being hostile towards him because he wanted to visit Nigeria, and I said no. So IBB called me and said, why? And I explained to him, he wasn't even coming to Nigeria alone. He was on a West African spring. He didn't consult us whether that date was convenient. He just gave us a date. So IBB said, please accommodate him. Now, that is a military attaché interfering in what he has no business interfering with. But because we had a military head of state, he, a lieutenant colonel, could now do his interference. So I don't blame the ministry at all. It is the way the present president wants it. And I hope that the incoming president will take another look at that structure and do the needful. You know, there have been a suggestion, in fact more than a suggestion now, that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should be upgraded from a ministry to a separate service, separate from the domestic service. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, do you know, there are more permanent secretaries. I mean, there used to be more level 17 officers in that ministry than in the whole of the Home Ministry, at least when I was a minister. If you were to call them permanent secretaries, Ministry of Foreign Affairs will have more permanent secretaries because it represents the totality of Nigerian interests abroad. It does not compete with them at home. But if in Rome, the government of Rome has something to do with agriculture, it's not going to call the Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria. He will call in the Nigerian ambassador and say, look, Italian interest in this, some farm or some agricultural project, and we are not happy about what is happening to our people there. Is then the ambassador will now make reference back home. But we don't do that. The last 2013, is it, National Conference, agreed to that proposal to make the Foreign Service, the ministry, a separate service with its own head and everything. I hope that will be taken up. Because when trouble starts, it's the ministry that gets blamed. And I don't blame people that don't know the structural deficiencies in the way that ministry was set up and how the Home Service has fought any attempt to reform that ministry because the head of service wants all ministries under him or under her. So that deals with the issue of the ministry. I can't remember the second question you asked.
Violence in Sudan now, quickly, sir. The tribal violence as we wrap up. The fact that the conflict has taken a tribal dimension.
Oh, yes. But you should have expected it. The Rapid Response Force was recruited from the Janjaweed, located in the western section, to deal with Darfur, deliberately recruited on a tribal basis. And once they succeeded in suppressing Darfur, the head of state at that time now decided, I could use this to defend my administration as a counterfoil to the Sudanese armed forces. So the Rapid Response Force had an ethnic basis in the way it was recruited. And I'm not then surprised. And you see, this is what happens when you paper over cracks, which you should be addressing, trying to cement by a government of inclusivity, by making sure that your institutions represent, the totality of your domestic interests. But when you paper them over, at the slightest opportunity, things will bubble out. And it's unfortunate because Sudan is going to take down a lot of African countries surrounding it.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Akinyemi. Unfortunately, we're out of time. As always, when we have you on the show, we could spend considerable amount of time dissecting issues around on the African continent and, of course, abroad as well. Thank you very much.